just saying I think there was some really nice gems in there, and I forgot to have the record button on. So c'est la vie.
I suppose I'll start. So, well, about integration. Recently, the last week, I think I started my usual. It was a particular day I decided to do my usual meditation, and I start with breathing into myself. And then, for some reason, I decided to breathe in stillness, and stillness I breathed in, and it slowly kind of filtered. It was noticeably stillness, and I thought, why did that was such a different experience. I didn't know I could do that, and I suppose that started the inquiry, or when you gave that talk, the little share that you had been more into, well, how far does, or is that integration, or is that a form of it? And I suppose I wasn't sure if I had integrated the light with stillness, and if that was a form of that too. And so there was one side of the spectrum is that I've been exploring, and the other side, the other part of the spectrum is in every day when there are moments where I do become aware. I do get into sovereignty and sort of walk around and be aware. And then I went through your talk, and I've written down some questions. Is around, there are lots of pieces that you talked about. So we get a chance, if the conversation moves there, maybe we can just start to. There are a couple of questions there that are relevant. So I just wanted to firstly respond to your questions, in the beginning of this talk around, what our experiences are in integration so far. So yeah, that's me. I'll pass it back into the center.
I just want to pick it up there, because I think the way you're doing it, Shu, is more valuable than what I was suggesting, which was to put the questions in at the same time. That would be an overload. So let's start with that. What Shu has done is just the sharing of, your experiences around integration, and we'll take the conversation in a spiral and see where it goes from there. So passing the stick back to the center.
It's really interesting I came into this thinking that, it would be more about questions and looking at what came up in that talk. But I think it's really nice, the question that just came out now, or just before, of what is integration? How do I experience it? I hadn't really thought of that. And the two things that I'm very present to are, what is that for me, and what is my edge? The reason I think that I responded with at some point by saying I need to know more about integration is I don't really have a concept of that yet. The edge for me, and what I think integration is I'm very much feeling the cohabitation when I feel I feel a part, and I feel stillness, and I'm bringing them together, and I'm feeling what's the difference, what's the gap. And to me, it seems like cohabitation is almost a step to integration. That's something that occurs to me. The other part of it, so that's in response to what is my edge. The other part of it for me is, I guess, when I experience what I think is integration, is when I can respond, is when I can be in myself. And I know the difference between that and when something happens in the external world and I start feeling like I'm coming apart and falling into pieces and getting angry and responding to old programs. And that, I would say that's not integrated. But again, that's me just speculating now from where we've begun. Yeah. And that's enough for me to begin with. I'll pass the stick back to the middle as well.
Yeah, I think this question has become more interesting than I first thought, actually. I think I've had an idea of what integration feels for me, so whether that's correct or not, but I feel it in different ways. Sometimes it feels like everything's blending together and softening and dissolving, and there's almost a feeling of relief and release with that. And then sometimes I feel it is a big energy movement. It's almost an orgasmic feeling. And sometimes that's through my body, or if it's sometimes in response to a trauma, say a pain in my knee, then I will feel that just in my knees sometimes. And then as you were talking, I sort of started thinking about sovereignty and integration, and that link to that when I'm feeling sovereign, when I'm with other people, perhaps I'm operating from a more integral place. I'm finding I'm more and more interested in this question now. I actually mostly came here because I want to practice being sovereign while I'm talking, being in my felt sense. I can do that quite well when I'm listening, but I've been over the last couple of weeks sort of thinking, right, I might be going out to where I sit meeting some people or friends, and I think, right, I'll stay in my felt sense while I do that. And as soon as I open my mouth, it flies out the window, and I completely forget about it. And I guess it's a kind of a movement. So when I'm listening, I'm not moving. When I'm talking, I'm moving in a way. Because I also do it when I go for a walk with my dog, and I manage it for about 2 or 3 steps, and then I forget and it goes out the window. So that's kind of where I'm at with all of that. Back into the centre.
Right. So it's very valuable, the pieces that you share and how you kind of sensing vibrationally where you are with that. And I love what you shared, Aaron, about when I can respond, which is sovereignty, is ability to respond rather than react. Yeah. And so sovereignty in some ways for me is integration, and being sovereign. What can happen, I found in my own journey over and over and over again, like thousands of times, is that you have an experience and then you go, oh, I know sovereignty, as if that's a fixed place and a fixed understanding that is unchanging. But in reality, our journey of integration and sovereignty is ongoing, and we, at the deepest sovereignty, we're in touch with an integration where I'm aware of my stillness or my absolute, and therefore aware of all, including the person I'm with at that place, you know, like I'm touching the soul. And at the same time, I'm not disconnecting from that to be an expression of that. Yeah. So if you know, when you have these kinds of experiences, it's beautiful because there is no sense of a division. There's no sense of a position. There's no engagement in a timeline. There's just the moment where you're absorbed in the moment. And the felt sense is obviously the doorway for that to happen. So yes, Wendy, it's a practice, and it's really cool to have a group like this to, you know, to practice and to remind each other to remain in that connection and to investigate what's actually going on when I disconnect. Yeah. So, you know, the other pieces about integration is to become an integrated you, the integration of you, which is why cohabiting, Aaron, is so valuable in my view. And it was kind of my default way of showing up. So, you know, it was like I was teaching everybody to show up the way that I showed up. But when I started to learn from people what that did for them, you know, that cohabiting is like that Buddhist thing that the third Zen patriarch or some dude wrote that says, you know, the great way is not difficult for he who has no preferences. And so, you know, the quality of cohabiting or the grace of cohabiting is there are no preferences. It's like, you know, I have this pain in my body and here's stillness, and I'm not, you know, there was some conversation in the group before that kind of waved a red flag at me, and because of, you know, a rabbit hole that I went down that was a fucking dead end that caused me some problems, you know. So it was like, oh, I don't want you guys to have to waste 2 or 3 years down that rabbit hole. But because the ego has had so much pain and suffering, that when it finds the light, and I think this is an investigation that some of the questions that Shu has been sharing make it valid. When we find the light, we just want to be in the light. We just want the light. You know, like Ubud's full of light bunnies. You know, nobody wants the shadow. It's like, I just want the light. So when we find the light, you know, pretty much every single person I've ever worked with gets caught in the trap like a moth to the flame of attaching to the light. Yeah. And that's not integration. Yeah, that's a preference. And that preference is going to kick back to you because you are the light, but you're also not the light. You're also the shadow. And it's really the meeting point of those polar opposites, if you will. Yeah. Where stillness can be found, where, you know, if you take your light experience as deep as you can go, it's going to come out of stillness or emptiness. If you take your shadow experience, your pain, as deep as you can go, it's also coming out of emptiness. So emptiness is the union point of light and shadow. So the first thing most people do is they attach to the light. Yeah. And what the light does is it's a soothing balm, you know, like that experience that Wendy shares about, which is similar to what I often feel is like when something shifts, a sort of sense of a light and expansion. Yeah, it's like an integration response and a relief. I think you said, Wendy, it's like something's dissolving and I feel a release and a relief. And that light is like your essence. It's like you kind of drop down in through the darkness or whatever you were sensing into and made contact with your light. And for many years, I thought the light was the end point of healing. And which was kind of weird, but, you know, because I was hanging out in emptiness. Yeah. And what I understand in the place that I sit now, and is that emptiness. For me, emptiness became something I attached to. It was like, if I find stillness, it's so pleasant here. You know, it's quiet, it's whole, it feels, it feels integrated, it feels there's no suffering there, there's no pain here. And so I attached to emptiness, and I actually did this as an infant, and I'm going to talk some more in a different video about freeze and developmental trauma, because I think there are aspects of that in some of people in the group, and I think it would be valuable to kind of give you the skinny on all of those things. So what we're doing here is using stillness, not using it as an ego using something, but that we're integrating through stillness. So stillness is the doorway into the one undivided self, capital S. And when anything meets that self, so this is the black hole that you see in the picture on the top of our group page. When anything meets that vibration, it dies. That's the release and the relief that you feel as an integration. Yeah. And what's really important is discernment, like what you're talking about, Aaron, really that differentiation in the cohabiting space. I was working with somebody recently in a session who has done quite a bit with me, and her experience of her field was harmony. Yeah, she has a lack of awareness. I felt a whole bunch of other stuff in her field that didn't feel like harmony. So she is attached to harmony. Yeah. And it's only through noticing not just harmony, but what's not harmony. If you ask the question, what's not harmonious here? Or if you ask the question, who is it that's attached to harmony? Who is the sense of self? Who is the I? Yeah. Then you start to reveal a whole bunch of other things. Yeah. And so if you're the kind of person who has this kind of spaciousness that all seems okay when you're doing your meditation, and yet your life isn't okay, then there's a fucking avoider in here, like big time. Yeah, there's like someone that's like looking at it and going, it looks okay to me, I'm alive. And I don't want to bring up shit, because my whole pattern is I want to avoid shit. Yeah, so the discernment that we need to have for complete integration of whatever we're working with, there's levels and layers, has to include the sense of self, the experiencer, the experience, and the infinite or stillness. And the cohabiting and discerning those three, will endeavor to show you an alchemy of integration naturally. The system starts to unify, clear out, whatever, like you might be just doing that in a meditation, and your money issues might go away, and you're not even working on money. Why? Because you're becoming you. Yeah. So this is the soul work is from the inside out. Whatever integration you do ripples through the whole system. And so how you relate to money or other people and so on will naturally change along with you. The other thing I want to share about this topic that seems so, was incredibly valuable to me, was many years ago when I was doing Nassim Haramein's first delegate program. I can't think that's what he called it. In one of his modules, he said something like, the whole, what was it? The whole is not greater than the sum of the parts. The whole is indeterminate, or what was it? It's going to come to me when I'm not thinking about it. But the whole is, there's a word and it's not there at the moment. So the saying that's very common is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And what he was saying, which shifted my reality, you know, over the next 2 or 3 weeks in the most profound way, was that the whole is, it's kind of like it's dynamic, it's changeable and unstable from the sum of the parts. So if you add all the parts together, you don't get a whole, because there's no such thing as a whole and there's no such thing as a part. And everything is alive and dynamic and constantly informing everything else. You can see why your mind can't do this. So some of what I share and how I share it, which has changed, you know, people like Wendy worked with me hundreds of years ago. And, you know, whatever you learned there, Wendy, you can throw out the window, and we're starting again because, you know, my system keeps getting upgraded and I keep finding more coherent ways of sharing. But that cohabiting, when you're cohabiting, you know, when you're feeling, you know, purple and you're discerning the blue and the red in the purple, you got 3 different flavors. That's the whole and the parts. And blue is affecting red and purple is affecting blue. You know, each one is affecting the other. So your sense of self, you know, the who you think you are, is affecting the experience that you're having. Breathe that in. And the experience that you're having is affecting who you think you are. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the who that's here thinks life is shit, the experience I'm going to have is life is shit. If I'm having an experience that feels like life is shit, I'm going to become identified as life is shit. So, you know, and vice versa if you're having a good time. You know, so this kind of feedback, feed forward loop that's happening between the upper dantian and the lower dantian, between me and other, is alive. There's no realized place that's called done. It's a dynamic moment by moment, feeling the felt sense and being yourself, so that you know who you are and what it means to you and how to be you. So yeah, I mean, there's heaps more about integration, but I'm going to put the stick back in the center now because I've been sharing a lot.
Maybe there's one question I wanted to ask that might, you know, shed a bit more light around this conversation, and that one is in the sharing you talked about how you discern the stuff that was transpersonal and pre-conscious ancestral. How did you discern that?
Okay, so one of the things that integration response creates is a knowing. Yeah, that's not a knowing, a mental separate part of me that knows something that I'm attached to. It's a direct experience of truth. So it's alive in the moment and it's obsolete in the next moment. And we live in a dimension that requires language. So, you know, hence as we develop this group, we're moving toward the integration of language, which we're doing by sharing and listening and speaking from the felt sense. So, you know, when you shared your question, there's an I there that's got a question, it's got a certain understanding, it's got a question. And the real work is to feel that, flavor of shu that's sitting in that question. Yeah. So as a regular human being who might not be doing this kind of work, you would want to establish credibility, and you would want to know, well, gee, you know, do you have a degree in science, and what did you do in your laboratory, and you know, what is the basic fundamental proof, and can this be duplicated in a different laboratory? And all of that's what the mind is all about. Yes. And that science is causing havoc in our world, because that science is based on a objective reality, subject object, a duality, yeah, that doesn't recognize the looker. It doesn't recognize that the scientist is influencing the result of his experiment. So I cannot give you the kind of information that the world wants: proof, evidence, duplication. Yeah, this is the realm of the mind. But I can invite you, you know, where did I learn that? How did that information come to me? Because I know the place of purity in my being, and I know when I'm integrated and whole, and I'm listening from there with an inquiry. Yeah. And it might have taken me, I don't know, I don't count years, but it might have taken me several years to clear the levels and layers of dross out of the system, to find the little vigilant, hyper-vigilant part of me that was sitting in the witness, who had fooled me for years and years. I had no sense of post-traumatic stress disorder anymore, or hypervigilance in the way that I lived my life, but my body did. my body is, you know, I do want to share about the freeze state, because it's a lot to do with that. But witnessing the witness is, and this is key and fundamental to integration, because as I've said, I think it was to Wendy at one point, you know, what's the difference between the identity and the witness is just a journey from the identity as being kind of gross. You know, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a work person, I'm an artist. You know, it's kind of like, it's a frame, yeah, that imprints how you relate to somebody else and how somebody else perceives you. And everybody does that from a very disconnected place. Yeah. So if you own your artist identity, it doesn't mean you stop being an artist. It just means you're free from that program of acting as an artist in the world that you do art in. Yeah. So that's the grossest layer. And you can, you know, each identity, it's like there's something happened to you, and an identity, a separation gets created, an ego gets created, and something happens then to that ego, and another kind of added part gets patched into the program of your ego, and another and another and another. So as you do this work, you know, I say to you, okay, be the artist. I'm using Aaron, it's relevant to you, but I'm using that as an example. Fully feel what it feels like to be the sense of I as an artist. Yeah. And something will integrate. If you become one with that flavor of me, the artist, it will integrate. If you take it all the way to zero, or the infinite, or emptiness, or bring stillness in, it will integrate. And that's already a step toward freedom. However, now you can check out, what's it like to be an artist when I'm talking to my friends? What's it like to be an artist or identity artist when I'm talking to my boss? What's it like when I'm talking to my students? And you'll notice that there are different flavors of that fundamental artist identity that shows up in those different roles, student, teacher, so on. So, you know, this shows you that there's more than just one thing that you know about that's shaping your artist flavor. So if you do reflection technique on your students, your boss, your everything like that, and you find the identity of artist in relation to those, you're just knocking off layers. Now, are those layers all to do with an artist? No, they're all to do with everything. So when you heal your artist, you're actually healing from the inside out. So there's more of you here in freedom. So when you're working at that gross level, that's fine. You know, you can work there for years. I did. And when you clear enough of all those characters out of the way, all those schizophrenic dudes that take you over, you start seeing that at the more and more subtle level, there's a looker that maybe you don't have a name for what that identity is, but there is kind of a sense of me here, maybe unencumbered by the sense of an artist, free of the artist. But there's still a sense of me. And that sense of me, if it's separate from stillness, is holding a lot of trauma. So that sense of me is the doorway, and it's a far more profound doorway than what trauma healing is about. Trauma healing is just about, and it's really important, you can't bypass trauma healing. Trauma healing is about having the courage to feel your fear, to feel your anger, to feel the experience that's happening. That's what trauma healing is about. You can't just zoom up to the upper dantian and get rid of the person who's creating that. Yeah, because then that's another part of you that's split off, that has an agenda and doesn't work. So you have to do diligence to the willingness to feel. You know, and you're all somewhere on some sort of scale with that right now. I don't know where you are, but you have a sense. So, you know, once you've done that, once you feel in alignment with owning your shit, then you need to own the part of you that's creating your shit. And once you get to that initiation, yeah, which you may or may not be in yet, I don't know. Once you get to that, that's what we're working with, is the perceiver who's actually looking through the filter that says, this is what life looks like. Life is dangerous. I don't have enough. Nobody loves me. Whatever the filter is doing. So you can have the experience over and over and over again that nobody loves me, and I have a pain in my solar plexus as a result. Or you can find the part of you that split off, that created that story. You can find the storyteller, which is the exercises you're working with right now. And that storyteller, you know, can have been created beyond anything before you had a conscious mind, before you had a story. Yeah, and this isn't just Leonora's thing. There's actually quite a lot of empirical evidence, finally, thank you, about ancestral trauma. They reckon it only goes back 7 generations. I reckon it goes back to the infinite. So if you like that kind of stuff, I can add that to the group. You know, those kinds of articles that help you see what, you know, science is finally kind of acknowledging that used to seem so friggin' esoteric, but your DNA is epigenetically, so something happens in your world and your DNA can get turned on. And the reason it does that is because if I haven't got the resources to survive, maybe I'll learn something that the ancestor did to survive, because they did survive. That's how I got born. And so there's all this stuff that you consciously have no real knowledge about. I mean, you can tap into mum and dad's vibration that you knew them as to give you some clues. You know, it's really cool to do reflection technique on mum and dad and siblings. So what I found was, in the curiosity about who's looking, and then who's looking at who's looking, was the witness of the looker. And she, in my field, lived on this sort of back membrane. You know, for most people that I've worked with, it is around the eyes or around the head. It can be the back of the head, it can be the center of the head, somewhere in the head. Usually it's in the head. If somebody's got major soul loss, it's out of the body. Like somebody out there is looking at everything. So that was pre-conscious, you know, like, so it felt for me that I'd healed everything that I was conscious of, and I felt integrated into stillness. Yeah. But what I found as I investigated that was that I hadn't discerned my masculine from my feminine. So stillness was then therefore not able to integrate the piece of the masculine and the feminine. So if you look at a lot of kind of esoteric sacred geometries, you see the triangle, yeah, the Trinity. And I've looked in those places, by the way, you know, for clues. And so working with the Trinity, I had to find this sense of I. Yeah. And I had two senses of I. One was, I'm God. I'm the I am. I am the I am. There was a sense of I. It was just like a no self. It was just felt fully integrated, fully whole. Everything, the whole universe was in it. And then the other self that I had felt like I had to be a healer because all of humanity was suffering so much. And it felt like I was the collective trauma of all humanity. And so talk about opposite polarities, you know, one really dark and one really light. So where was the divine child? Where was the unique me? And my divine child birthed out of a no self, yeah, or my sense of I was not discernible from the no self. It was like looking, you know, when you're looking at an identity and it's blue, and stillness is, or let's say the identity is red, and stillness is this dark, spacious, absent blue. My identity looked like a dark, spacious, absent blue. So I couldn't contrast it. Yeah. And that actually came out of developmental trauma, which is an area that I've had to focus on because my wound was, before I had a conscious mind, a significant wound. And there's now, even in the mainstream, some research that's been done over 20 years called adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences, so they're doing 0 to 18, which is conception to age 18. And I'd be really interested if they were looking at conception to age 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, because I think there's a lot more in there. And it would be interesting to contrast that to after 5, between 5 and 18. But anyway, these studies or this research on adverse childhood experiences is showing how disease gets created. Yeah. So, you know, what's always been a bit of a bugaboo for me is that the established matrix of medicine or health systems, sick systems, I call them, had no recognition at all of trauma. and Gabor Mate, who's a medical doctor, has done a wonderful job and is incredibly popular on highlighting why addicts took drugs because of their adverse childhood experiences. So, when I look at the mainstream and also the mainstream trauma healing technologies, they all function in a duality. There's a therapist and a client. I've done that. And the therapist is often wounded, but is trying to heal the client, and so when you're looking at the whole field, there's an incredible limit by the identity of the therapist and what they know. And so for me, I had this knowing that true healing came from an alchemical natural response of the system, from being safe, being connected, being available to feel from a non-dual integrated place. And that I don't really see out there too much. Thesa, who's been once in a blue moon a mentor for me, her and I do that same work in that way. She has her flavor of it and I have mine. But and another woman who I met probably the same time I met Thesa, or maybe soon after. She does Fleur. She's worked with me a lot, and we've tracked along, and she has her flavor of this work as well. So it's not something that you can go out and tell people about. And I think you guys are starting to understand that. Who's listening? They can't hear you. So it's kind of an interesting, sometimes frustrating place to be. But I don't know if I've answered Shu's question, but I really feel that once you understand this sort of deep sovereignty, you don't have to heal anybody. You just have to heal yourself. And when you heal yourself, you're actually creating pathways in the collective field that allow other people to pick up that through an energetic transference, rather than trying to pick it up from here, which doesn't work. Okay, I'm putting the baton back in the center.
I just wanted to say, yeah, absolutely answered. Got it. No, it was a great answer that touched on so many things. And what I also got from it is just the understanding of how you've journeyed through that to then get to a different clarity to be able to understand and discern what is what. So yeah, thanks for explaining that.
You have to give up your mind completely to know.
Yeah, I didn't want to know. No, I just wanted you to explain. I didn't know what I wanted to know. It was more,
Yeah, that's how I heard it, Shu. Yeah, and that discussion about science versus what we're doing. Science is very informative. It's valuable. It has a place. Everything has a place. But the fundamental root of it is dualistic. And so it's not quantum. It's not considering, unconditional love is like that cohabiting, let it all be here. And, the courage to let it all be here and not be preferring something is love. And that's what creates the alchemy, and you can't explain that to an ego. So, that's the only reason I was saying, you have to really be able to not transcend, but integrate your mind so that it's on the team. Okay, baton in the middle.
Baton in the middle.
I am wondering, because it's relevant to myself, the piece about my going into a journey through stillness, through emptiness, but how there was a lack of it there. and you mentioned something about no self, about, and I get the feeling that that's kind of a way of hiding and a way of obscuring what's going on there. And I know you've just mentioned it just now too in your own experience. I'm quite interested, because when we did that journey, I mean, I've gone back and watched the video again and taken myself through it a couple of times, and I get a sense of it now, but at the time I didn't. I was quite, I'd convinced myself that that was stillness. And I guess there's a part of me, and it may be mind, it may be ego, that's just a bit worried about this discerning. It's like, how do I discern when I'm in a no self, a false self?
That's a very good question, and a very deep question. So just really honoring your quest. So the way that we're working, the true self is the light, your essence, a unique expression of the absolute, not disconnected from the absolute. Yeah. So it's kind of like you can't get there because egos can't get there. But you can notice what's not that. Like your system actually is divinity. It's already kind of like, it's like a remembering process. So it's kind of like the stuff's already there. And so the way that we use this contrasting and cohabiting is really to, so how do you discern is to, and this is really relevant for where I feel you to be, is to spot the witnesser that's witnessing the whole thing. And that is, that took it's only been like maybe 6 months ago, or maybe it was before the group. I can't remember time very well, but it's not that long ago that I landed in that initiation and the assembly points, the event horizon. Yeah. So what that's pointing to is also the lack of awareness. And this is relevant to Wendy as well. It's probably relevant to everybody, but the lack of awareness is a disconnect. So who is it that's disconnecting? It might be pre-conscious. Yeah. So it's like, it's harder to find it. So, and if you look at your basic beingness, even in the last sharing that you did about, I think it was your talk with Shu or somebody, there's an incredible, it was your journey with the manifesting money thing. It's like there's an incredible avoidant being in you. It's like, I got a lot of shit I don't want anymore. I won't look at that. So who is that? I mean, that's a great journey of inquiring. That default way of being is a rigidity. It's a fixation, that's coming out of a trauma. So, if you're doing I think you were talking about the stillness meditation, but if you're doing a stillness meditation and you're in stillness and it all feels nice, the avoidant part of you may not want to do anything else. And that's an attachment to hiding in stillness, and it's not your fault. It's like, I was not trying to hide in stillness. I was trying to fucking find my true self. It was like, I was always trying to do that. And so who was the I that was trying to do that? Was just, my system got blasted into smithereens before I'd created the brain development between the mind and body. So that's what I call developmental trauma. And so it was like there was no map between stillness and the body. Yeah. And so the body went into disease because the I that's avoidant, the hypervigilant I, is going, I won't go there or I'll die. I won't go there or I'll die. So it doesn't want to go there. And even if it doesn't know how to go there. So I stared at, my navel for eons And what I needed to find was the part that is avoiding. And he or she or it is right there. You know, when you look at the what I call the assemblage point, or actually what Almas calls the assemblage point, and I borrowed, I guess I kind of call it the event horizon, but then Nassim calls it the event horizon. So, you know, I don't have my own term for it, but Thesa calls it the mysterious pass. And I think that might have a Taoist origination. I don't really know. But there's this place where you emerge. It's like the first arising of awareness, where you emerge out of the infinite absolute. Yeah, and the whole thing gets assembled. Your reality gets assembled. Yeah, so if you're looking for the root cause, it's right there. And I also call it, you know, my own term, which I don't think was original, but it's what it felt like. Was I was exploring the polarity of life and death, and there was a real mix-up there, because if you think of the I am, that's actually death. It's not moving, it's total stillness. It's the embodiment of stillness, which is the freeze. And the life was also frozen. So my body, or the disease in my body, was a freeze. You know, like when you have that kind of a trauma, and you don't come out of freeze, or it might take you, you know, some people it can take 5 years, 10 years, or not even in this lifetime. You just die of disease, and you're not even aware that your body's getting diseased. You know, you're not even aware that your cortisol levels are up, and therefore your sugar levels are up. You're not even aware of all these things, because you've never had the contrast of not having that. This is particularly with pre-conscious trauma or ancestral trauma. You've never known anything different. So how can you discern? You need to have differences to discern. And so when you're sensing stillness, I just want to invite you to just to know that there are levels and layers to that. So don't get stuck in stillness. Become curious about who's exploring stillness, you know, because there's something here that's not still, that's looking at stillness. So there's the separation. So if you can move your orientation to the stillness that you have, whatever level it is, and then sense the flavor of I, or notice the witness that's looking at stillness, or move your foot and see what the eyes do, you know, all these pieces are in the group somewhere. Then you start to notice a different stillness comes in, because the more that I moves away, the more the true stillness is integrated, and the divine child, or your essence, you know, naturally arises, and you inhabit your back body as you. Yeah, and then you test drive it with all your friends and so on and so forth. So good question.
The microphone's off, Leonora.
If there's anything else, let's bring it up now, and if not, let's just say blessings to each other and get on with the rest of Saturday. Yeah, feel complete? Yeah, okay, great. Good, lovely to see you all. See you next time.
Thank you. Good to see everyone too.
Yeah. I think we'd do a group thing again soon, because this was not supposed to be a group thing, and we'll try and do a whole group thing soon as our check-in, and we'll try and use the new ways of sharing more deeply. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
See you all.
And see you.